Hello, everyone. Welcome into this week's Sports and Leisure History Look Back. Always great to be here and always great to talk about some sports history. We got a great week's worth of history that we posted about, and we're going to talk about the week of June 8th. I got some NBA and some athletes that made history at a young age and a lot more. I'm Jeff Klein, as always, and I'm here with my good friend Clayton Hamilton. How you doing, Clayton?
I'm doing great, man. It's summer.
It is summer. Yeah, it's I love summer because I love baseball, but it's just great time for sports. I wanted to talk to you. Well, we want to get into some of these sports topics, but I wanted to ask you a question before we talk. Since we are going to talk about a lot of young talent that had high ceilings early in their careers and lots of potential, do you enjoy watching that process of young athletes and their development process and what rookies look like and sort of how their careers evolve? Because I feel like now we're such an impatient society that people just don't have time to let athletes do. They don't want to spend time or appreciate the development of an athlete. What do you think on that?
Well, there are certainly times that it frustrates me, and I would say that I love watching an athlete achieve and develop and discover in individual sports significantly more than in team sports. And the rush to get a rookie quarterback under center before they have any idea what they're doing is one of the things that is really hurt the NFL and the development process. That I like those guys that sit for a year and hold a clipboard and try to figure out what's happening. Because you think about it being, oh, well, hey, they've been playing sports their whole life. It's no different. It's so different. That's why you have that. Oh, look, he's not making a freshman's mistake. You have senior leadership. Senior leadership is what wins, right? And then a year later, it's rookie mistakes is what loses. And there's such a difference between the high school game and the college game and the pros. It's the difference between putting on a community theater play and doing a Broadway show. Like, it's
Right.
that big of a gap.
Right.
And people think that's not. It's the same thing, but it's not. The mistakes that you make as a rookie, when a guy's 3 yards and he's open in high school, and a yard and a half and he's open in college, and half a yard he's open in the NFL.
Yeah.
So I really like to see that on the individual side, seeing tennis players, track and field athletes, boxers. Those guys develop, step up in class. But on a team, I need them ready.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about sort of the pressures that start increasing when they sort of go make that journey through their career from amateur and college, and if they do go to college for their sport and then into the pros. And I always think about golf, and I'm not much of a golfer, but I know enough to understand that just because you can hit an amazing score at the your local rec parks, where you have a rough course and you're with your friends and you're hitting the ball around, the pressure and stress that adds at in those world class tournaments, it's nothing by comparison. For the numbers are totally different, the pressure is totally different. I mean, you look at like tennis, and the one mental mistake just causes players to unravel in those major tournaments. So it's interesting. I love it. I love seeing the development. It can be frustrating, especially when I'm really invested in a team and someone can't hit the strike zone, or they lose control of their off-speed pitch or whatever the case is.
It's funny that you brought up golf. I always think about when they have that shot from behind the golfer and the little tiny tunnel is lined with people. And I think about all the people that I've played with that would have killed somebody because they're duffing one off into the ladies' tee, or like shanking one, that's going 42-degree angle right off of the tee. And I always think about how like that never happens. And
Right.
probably like they never top one.
Yeah.
They never hit a shank into the crowd that's standing right there. They'll hit a shank, 280 yards down. They'll hit the crowd, but never in the tunnel.
Yeah, so take that, all you people who comment on all these sports articles, I would never do that. I would never hit a shot like that. Last week I played with my friends and, I shot at 68 or whatever. So they, it's a little different.
I've got 4 hole-in-ones on Golden Tee. Come on.
My mom once told me she bowled a 300 game on accident. You can do that maybe at your local bowling alley with your friends, I guess, if you're a pretty decent bowler. But,
or if you're like Ishmael in Kingpin and you bowl 15 frames.
Right. All right, well, talking about development and just time it takes to refine your skills actually kind of segues pretty good into our first topic that we're going to talk about, which is the 1989 Bad Boy Pistons, a team that had been kind of grown together and really refined their skills over several seasons, and really at the end of the 80s there, they sort of hit their peak. And we posted about this on June 13th because back in 1989, the seemingly invincible Lakers, who dominated 80s basketball, got bounced from the NBA Finals, being swept by the Pistons. It was actually a rematch of the previous Finals, where the Pistons avenged their Game 7 loss at the hands of the Lakers. And it would be the Pistons' first franchise championship. They'd repeat again the following season. And then they ultimately won a third ring in 2004. But this was kind of the bridge from the 80s style basketball to what the 90s were, right?
Yeah, this was the link between the Magic Bird years and the Michael Jordan years. Were this little window of 88, 89, 89, 90, 90, 91, where you saw the Pistons, they had those 3 straight appearances from, like I said, 80, it was 89 or 88, 89, 90. And when you think about where they came from, the Pistons, they had lost 60 games back in 1980. And at the beginning of the decade, they were a terrible franchise back when the Lakers were really getting rolling and winning all of those championships throughout the 80s. And so for it to come full circle for them, from being the doormat at the beginning of the decade to knocking off the Lakers and being back-to-back champions by the end of the decade, was a really remarkable turnaround that had a lot to do with their general manager, Jack McCluskey, and his willingness to do things differently and change over the roster, and the hiring of Chuck Daly. That was the perfect personality to deal with a lot of really loud personalities that they developed in Detroit.
Yeah, and I think that was one of Chuck Daly's really signature characteristics about running that team, is he had all these different personalities, and it was a bit of a contrast from the Lakers and the Celtics, which were really these star-driven, sort of top-heavy rosters. And the fact that he had this, he had a lot of players that were, in some cases coming off the bench, who probably could have started on most any team, and he got everyone to buy into this idea of versatility, flexibility, adaptability, and one thing that I think is a great example of that is they made an amazing trade. They got rid of Aguirre, and I blanking on who they picked up.
No, they brought in so it was Aguirre and Adrian Dantley.
Yes.
They brought Aguirre in, got rid of Adrian Dantley.
Yeah, sorry, I was blanking on the names, getting the names mixed up. But he brought it in because Dantley he didn't want to buy into that system, right? He didn't like losing minutes and scoring opportunities to Isaiah Thomas. And Mark Aguirre came in, and he was friends with Isaiah Thomas, but he also complemented that system pretty well.
Yeah, and Adrian Dantley hated losing minutes at the end of games to Dennis Rodman, who'd be in there for defense and for rebounding. And Adrian Dantley was trying to get his points, and that was a huge problem. But yeah, those guys that said, hey, we're gonna fit in and we're gonna be a part of this system. And Rick Mahorn, he was one of those guys that was really part of the change. John Sally, who was a role player guy, but when you think about the Bad Boy Pistons, you think about John Sally, and John Sally spent a tremendous amount of time on the bench, but he's one of those key cogs and one of the key guys that really made the Pistons what they were, because they could go 8, 9, 10 deep which sometimes they needed to because of ejections and foul troubles and all of those sorts of things that the Pistons tended to run into. But boy, what a neat team that really encapsulated the time as the basketball world and the world and society in general was changing from the end of the 80s to the dawn of the 90s.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. It kind of mirrored a little bit of what society was. The greed and the flash and the pizzazz that was the 80s. What is it? Wall Street greed is good, right? So it was it was that era, and they brought in sort of this physicality and this kind of brutal defense that really was antithesis almost to the Showtime Lakers, right? They were almost the exact opposite of what the Showtime Lakers were.
Exactly. And if you look at pop culture in the 80s, and you had the Showtime Lakers, and what did you have? You had Michael Jackson, and you had Lionel Richie, and you had Cyndi Lauper, and that sort of pop culture. And then in 1988, Straight Outta Compton comes out. Right. And you have the Bad Boy Pistons, and before you know it, then Dr. Dre has his first album, and that's right when the Fab Five debut at Michigan, and that's when the LA riots happen, right at the end of this Pistons run. And it was really this sort of cultural shift that sort of was a tornado around this team of you love it or you hate it. And that's the same thing with hip-hop culture. You love it or you hate it. You're part of it or you're against it. And that was really what the Pistons were, and they were perfect, just perfect for that little small window of transition.
Yeah, Chuck Daly brought in that kind of us versus everyone mentality, right, where he sort of channeled that sort of anger, I guess, within the team that, hey, everyone is, targeting us, everyone is coming after us. We're not going to take that. We're going to beat down the other team. And the style of basketball that was the 80s, which was this fast-paced, even the Celtics, who were sort of different than the Lakers because they did have a little bit more physicality and they played at a little bit slower pace. They still had that sort of similar style that we saw in the 80s. And the way the Pistons won was by slowing those teams down intentionally, creating schemes that you really didn't see in the 80s, matchups. And I think it was sort of a transition to a new era of basketball.
And they were not afraid to clog up the lane. They were not afraid to be physical. They were not afraid of Magic Johnson. They were not afraid of Larry Bird. And that was one of the things that was kind of the hallmark. That there's a lot of teams that got beat by Bird and Magic in the dressing room, and the Pistons were not one of them. Dennis Rodman always said, right, if you can't beat them, beat them. That was his big quote. And that's kind of what they lived up to. And there was no flagrant fouls at that time. The flagrant foul rule didn't come into effect until after this Pistons team, partly because of this Pistons team. But that's one of the things, with Lambeer. If you're going to foul them, make sure they don't get the shot off. And that's one of the things that bothers me to this day when I watch NBA games. If you're going to foul a guy when he's going up for a layup, make sure he doesn't get the shot off.
Right.
Don't just the little touch foul. Don't give him a free and one. Make sure that the shot doesn't get up.
Yeah, and I think they had advantages, beyond that sort of mental, sort of trying to dominate you in the mental game. I mean, the fact that they had such a deep roster, they could play, 8-9 deep. And so now they're playing brutal defense, and they're wearing teams down for 48 minutes, where most teams didn't have that luxury. They couldn't keep up with that physical game. And one stat I thought was pretty mind-blowing when I was looking back over the roster from this 89 team was that no player on that roster averaged more than 20 points a game in the season. And that it's amazing because that just shows you how much they spread the ball around and how everyone was kind of getting in there and getting part in the action. And guys were sort of changing up roles as Chuck Daly saw fit.
And how much they like to play games under 100. They were huge in trying to play the games in under 100. So you have those teams that say, hey, if we're going to win tonight, we got to outscore, we got to hit 120, 125. But they were thinking, hey, if we hit 100, we win.
Right. Yeah, so really interesting period in basketball. I think they get forgotten about because when we think of the 80s, you think of the Celtics and the Lakers, and when you think of the 90s, think of the Bulls. But they were, even if they weren't winning the finals, they were still in it for a number of years, and they were a pretty dominant team. Really saw their peak in that sort of 88, 89,
Hmm.
89, 90 season.
Yeah, and especially when you think about the 1987, they had the Isaiah Thomas debacle with the inbound play with Bird, where he stole the ball, and they went from victory to defeat very quickly. And '87 could have been a year, and then they, for all intents and purposes, Jeff won the '88 finals against the Lakers.
Yeah.
And Bill Laimbeer, who his entire career has been hacking people to death, gets called for a foul when he never touches Kareem, the phantom foul at the Forum that replay surely would have overturned these days because there's no contact whatsoever. Kareem gets the benefit of the doubt. He goes to the free throw line. He hits these free throws. Lakers win that game. Lakers end up winning the series. So it was really even a better run. You think about what could have been, even though they had their back-to-back championships. They could have had 3 or possibly 4 in that window.
Was Scott Foster reffing that 88?
Probably, right? That's probably like Scott Foster's favorite thing. He probably likes to go back and watch that and then dream about it while he's sleeping.
That's right. Well, I want to transition to more NBA and sort of it's kind of part 2 of this segment, and it really covers 2 different posts that we made during that week. And it's really about the Bulls and the Rockets of the 90s. And so, we think of the 80s, as we've been talking about, as dominated by the Lakers and the Celtics, really their rivalry. The Lakers were sort of that 1A, and the Celtics, I guess, would be the 1B from the 80s. And as we've been talking, the Pistons really bridged the gap as we moved into the 90s. So let's talk about 90s basketball. And it really signaled the arrival of Michael Jordan. He was obviously in the NBA in the 80s, but really he didn't come into sort of being that legend that everyone, it was must-see TV until the 90s. And Hakeem Olajuwon with the Rockets, who was fantastic. So on June, on June 9th, in 1995, the Rockets set an NBA record with their 7th consecutive road win, and it came again Game 2 against the Magic in the finals. They'd repeat as champions, and then we also posted on June 14th, in 1998, the Bulls got their 6th championship. All 6 came in the 90s. It was led by Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Outside of the 6 won by Chicago and 2 from Houston, the only other teams to win in the 90s were the Pistons, which we just talked about, and then the Spurs at the end of the decade. We've been talking about sort of the bridging to the Bulls, and I want to just throw this out to sort of kick off this conversation. I think what the Pistons put the Bulls through made the Bulls who they became in the 90s, because the Bulls looked at the Piston as like, we have to get mentally tougher, we have to get physically tougher, and that's what they did, and they took over.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right on that. That the playoff runs and series against the Pistons was basic training for the Bulls. That was the obstacle course that you had to get through to become a Marine. They could not, I don't think, have been the Bulls that they were if they hadn't been put through the ringer by the Pistons. And you think about eras, right? We talk about what the 80s were and the bridge to the 90s. And then, the 90s is really, it's bookended by the end of one era and the beginning of the other in the Pistons, and then the Spurs, which went on to become, who you talk about in the 2000s.
Right.
And in that 8 win years in between in that decade, you get 3 from the Bulls, 2 from the Rockets, and 3 from the Bulls. But what's crazy is they never played each other in the finals.
Right. Yeah, and even Horace Grant admits that the Bulls, what the Pistons put them through, made the Bulls who they were in the 90s. A really tough, gritty team. I mean, I think everyone thinks of Michael Jordan and the Bulls, and rightfully so, and Scottie Pippen. But, they were a tough half-court defense team. They were gritty. They were sort of not as brutal as the bad boy Pistons, but they had a lot of those qualities. And yeah, I can't help but think, what Phil Jackson learned by observing Chuck Daly and the Pistons and adopting some of those sort of coaching philosophies. I mean, the triangle had to have grown out of sort of Chuck Daly's sort of schemes and matchups and so forth.
Yeah, you think about Daly and you think about Pat Riley from the Lakers and how Phil Jackson is kind of a combination of the two of them. He's a Chuck Daly and being the Zen master of how to get his roster to buy into what he's looking to do, and he's Pat Riley in getting all of as many of the eyeballs on him and talking about him as much as the team and taking a little bit of that pressure off and letting him be the star, just the way that Pat Riley was. It was almost like both of those were the prophet of what was to come with Phil Jackson.
Yeah, and I think the Jordan rules, right, where the Pistons really targeted Jordan and frustrated him and bogged him down and made him have to go outside himself and seek help from the other players on the court. Phil Jackson kind of flipped the script on that and used the us versus the universe mentality that we talked about, saying everyone's trying to get us, everyone's trying to get Jordan. In the locker room, as a team, we're going to come together, we're going to protect our own, and sort of kind of inverted that. And it helped sort of everyone coalesced around Jordan, around their stars, and we're say fine, they're going to have to beat us, and we're not going to lie down.
Yeah, and they also had that stigma of, oh well, and this sounds crazy to say, but is Jordan a bust, right? Because everyone was saying, well, Magic came into the league and won right away. Bird came into the league and he won right away. And now there's this Jordan character. He's been in the league since 84, 85 and can't get past the second round of the playoffs. This guy's kind of a bust, right? That was the big thing. He's a playoff bust. And that's odd to think about that, but that's what the media narrative at the time was, that he needed to be able to get to a finals. And then certainly once he got to the finals, we saw what he did. And then we saw what the Bulls did without him when he went to go play baseball for the 2 years that the Rockets won. It was Bulls, Bulls, Bulls. Jordan goes, plays baseball, Rockets, Rockets, and Jordan's back, Bulls, Bulls, Bulls.
Yeah, it's something I'm curious to get your thoughts on. Do you think the absence of Jordan is why the Rockets sort of won in that short window? I mean, it was only one season that Jordan was gone, and the Rockets did win. Jordan played in the playoffs when, the Rockets won again. So it wasn't entirely, but did that sort of create an opening for the Rockets, or, was it all on their own merits?
I think it was some of both. There were other factors, too. 1994, when the Rockets beat the Knicks and won their first championship. 1994 was also the first time in years that both the Lakers and the Celtics missed the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So there was no Lakers, there was no Celtics, there was no Jordan. And so it's kind of a perfect storm and opportunity for that Houston team. And then the next year when, as you said, Jordan only pretty much played the playoffs. He played a little, before when he came back from baseball. So it wasn't a full Jordan year. Mm-hmm. It was just sort of the best team at the right time. But that was still a really good team. Clyde Drexler and Hakeem Olajuwon and Sam Cassell and Robert Horry, those guys aren't slouches.
Right. Yeah, in 1995, they did beat 4 straight 50-plus and 60-plus win teams in the playoffs. So it wasn't, like you said, they weren't slouches. And I think you're right. And their head-to-head matchup against Chicago's during Chicago's three-peat window was they actually had a better record in head-to-head. Mm-hmm. So I think that part of the problem with the Rockets, what they ran into was a matchup, right? Because they ran into the Sonics. And the Sonics were a tough matchup for them with Sean Kemp and Gary Payton, Detlef Schrempf, Sam Perkins. So that was a tough, and it maybe wasn't so much about the Rockets not being good enough. It was just they ran into a team that seemed to handle them a little bit better.
And they had problems with the Utah Jazz after their championship run. And they were arguably a better team than the Jazz because remember they brought over Charles Barkley. So you had Drexler and Barkley and Olajuwon, and they were supposed to continue and present a challenge to the Bulls, and they couldn't get by them in 97 or 98. And they had back-to-back years that the Bulls and the Jazz met up, and it was a bad matchup for the Jazz with Chicago. So it's like the Jazz was a bad matchup for Houston, and Chicago was a bad matchup for the Jazz. So we got robbed of what everybody really wanted, which was Michael Jordan versus Hakeem Olajuwon.
Right. It's interesting because I find that such an interesting period in basketball because what we were just talking about with the Pistons. The Pistons at the beginning of that decade really set up this whole style of this type of NBA, right? It's these matchups we're talking about. It's this, grind it out defense, a lot more physical play. And these teams that we're talking about all were emblematic of that sort of style.
Yeah, they were, but they also benefited from a little bit of the starting to have the freedom of movement. Not as much. The flagrant foul, remember, the flagrant foul came into existence in 1991. So that was right after the end of the Pistons, and it was right at the dawn of Michael Jordan. And so it was a starting to begin to have that. But let's not forget how much and how physical that Houston and the Knicks series was, the OJ series. Right. That was nothing but hack at everybody. And so you had a whole group or a whole generation of players that were able to figure out and develop and how to thrive and really honestly figure out how to make a shot. That's what Jordan is so good at, is Jordan was able to create a mid-range shot when there was nothing there. Maybe better than anybody. And if you really want to compare the Jordan to LeBron and where is Michael Jordan far superior, it's that ability to create a shot from nothing when he has a majority of the rules against him and LeBron has a majority of the rules in favor of him. Right. Jordan can still get a 2-point shot off in a crowd easier and better than LeBron.
Yeah, and it's interesting because with the rule changes, I think one thing that Phil Jackson really saw in Chuck Daly, what he was able to do, was really use the rules and the refereeing to his advantage. He saw how he could really bend the whistle to protect his players and really allow someone like Michael Jordan to flourish. And, as you mentioned, the freedom of movement was on the rise and a lot more scoring, a lot more offensive driven. And I think that was really reflective of the NBA seeing, okay, the 80s, the Lakers and the Celtics sort of saved the NBA because they were struggling in the 70s with popularity and ratings and so forth. Now we move into the 90s where Michael Jordan turns it into a much more global sport. And now you get people from outside the United States really starting to tune in because everyone wants to see Michael Jordan. And I think that wasn't lost on Phil Jackson, and he could manipulate that and use that to his advantage to try to get an edge to Michael Jordan.
Yeah, and not be afraid to go away from his star having to do everything. Right. Now, Jordan was a great defender, but the series against the Lakers that got the Bulls their first championship, the series changed when Scottie Pippen started guarding Magic Johnson. And he was willing to make that leap and that change and be like, hey, I know that Jordan and Magic that's what everyone's here for, but you're not going to guard him anymore. We're gonna put Pippen on him. And to Jordan's credit, he bought into that and everything was fine. But to not be stubborn in a way that is detrimental was something that Phil Jackson was able to really hold as part of his legacy.
Yeah, I want to close this segment because I know you're a massive Hakeem Olajuwon fan, and I want to kind of give you an opportunity to just talk about what did you love about Hakeem? I mean, amazing player. I think anyone watching him loved watching him. But I know you've mentioned before he's one of your favorite players of all time.
I love it because he can defend somebody that's so far away from him. Like his ability to be a help defender was just amazing to me. That you would think somebody's got a clear layup, and then all of a sudden here would come Akeem Olajuwon. And I've always loved back to the basket post move players, and he for me is kind of the last of those great players. We got a little bit of it with David Robinson and Tim Duncan who came afterwards, but when you look at what's the more athletic version of Moses Malone, who I also love, now you have Akeem Olajuwon. It was as close to, at least for me, thinking about, what was it like for the people that got to see Oscar Robertson play. It was probably very close to what we got to see with Akeem Olajuwon. And I loved his ability to close out and play defense, help defense, and the post moves were ridiculous, and the willingness and the fight to rebound. He's fantastic. He's one of my favorites of all time.
All right. Well, let's move on to another one of your favorites, the Cincinnati Reds. And this is going to be hard for some people to believe if they are not aware of this history, but on June 10th in 1944, the old left-hander Joe Nuxhall of the Reds made his major league debut at age 15. And that's right, 15. Still the record for the youngest player ever to debut. And it didn't go well for him. He made that one start and then went back to his life as a high school student, I guess, and then eventually went back to the minors. And then he reemerged and had a very long career in the majors and was a pretty solid pitcher. But pretty amazing at 15 on June 10th in 1944. What were you doing at age 15, Clayton? Were you starting?
I was playing high school baseball.
Yeah.
And thinking that I could strike anybody out. Come on, old Nuxie did it. Now there is some controversy, or as the Brits would say, some controversy about whether or not he is the youngest, because Roy Campanella was slightly younger than him when he made his debut in the Negro Leagues.
Okay.
And with the changing of stats to have full major league acceptance and credibility and equality, that would technically make Roy Campanella the new leader of that record, even though they were in different leagues. So there is controversy if he is the youngest or not, but it's either him or Roy Campanella, depending on where you're coming from. Both amazing, both great players, but just had to get that out there. Nuxie was the best. For those that don't know what he did after his career, he was in the Reds radio booth for 38 years, and he is the childhood voice or the voice of the Reds for millions and millions of people. But a lot of pretty neat circumstances around how he ended up pitching for the Reds that very day.
Yeah, so on Campanella, I guess if you have to share a distinction with anyone, Roy Campanella is not a bad player to share.
And Joe Nuxhall's son had said that he was really thrilled that if it was going to be anybody, it's going to be Campanella, because Roy Campanella was one of Joe Nuxhall's favorite people.
Okay. Well, he was also a partner with Marty Brennaman for 31 years, right, in the booth. And Marty said that he believed Joe Nuxhall was the most beloved figure, not just player, but just figure in Cincinnati Reds history. Would you agree?
I would 100% agree with that. That for anybody born before the year 2000 who would have memories of Joe Nuxhall, that is absolutely 100% true. And not just for what he did on the field and what he did in the booth, but what he did in the community. He built a number of baseball diamonds around town for disabled baseball players, wheelchair players, and he was huge working with the Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. So beyond all of those things, he was just everything that you would want an ambassador of your organization to be. But what gets lost, Jeff, with him being so young when he first made his debut, he had a pretty good career.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was going to go back to his career. We're talking about his broadcast career, but his playing career, 16 years. And he was a pretty solid middle of the rotation pitcher. 390 ERA. His record was 135 wins, 117 losses. Not a huge strikeout pitcher, but it's a little bit of reflective of that era. I think the one thing that I thought was really fascinating when I was reading up a little bit on him was that when at 15 he got killed in his start. He didn't last an inning. He gave up a bunch of 5 runs. And then he went back to his high school and lived his life as a normal teenager. And then, as I said, he went to the minors and kind of worked his way through the minors. And then he reemerged at age 23 in 1962. And that's where he played the rest of his career. This idea that I was curious of how that affected him mentally, right? Because you put a young athlete in that position in front of a crowd and they have what they think is the start of a professional career and it goes really badly. And he said that he felt that was really a motivator for him, that he knew he could get back there and he wanted to work at it through the minors and develop and become a better pitcher and use that more as a learning experience.
Mm-hmm. And also too, I think he understood how he got there.
Yeah.
Which is really important because there's a lot of people that would say, "Oh, well, I'm 15. Look how great I am that I am here." But let's remember what the world looked like in 1944. There were 500 major league players who served in the armed forces during World War II, and there was an incredible need for players at the time, and that's how they ended up with Joe Nuxhall. They went to see his dad, who pitched in a rec league, and then Joe was playing on that team, and so they went to see his dad, and they ended up seeing Joe, and so they decided that they wanted to sign Joe. There was also a thing called bonus babies at the time. So one of the things that happened was there was no draft, there was no anything that resembled fairness and equality in terms of getting players. You could sign with anybody on any team for any amount of money. So a lot of the big market teams, the Yankees, the Dodgers, Cardinals, Cubs, all the teams with money would sign all the best players, stash them in their minor leagues just to keep them off of other rosters. And so out of this period of time where that was really prevalent is where the bonus rule came into effect, which meant if you got more than a $4,000 bonus, you had to be on the active roster. And if you weren't on the active roster, you immediately went on waivers and could be claimed by another team in order to stop that process before they ever got around to the draft. So that was in play, that a number of these big market teams, even if they had good players, they would just give them money and stash them in the minors to keep teams like the Reds from having to run out a 15-year-old. And so that's sort of where he ended up, or how he ended up in this game. And they were losing 13-0 in the 9th inning, so they went ahead and said, "Hey, let's just waste his arm today." But I think he understood that in a way that it wasn't, I've gotten here because I'm awesome. And so it wasn't really a shocker to him when he ended up, getting beat. And so I'll also forget, he could have gone up to the Reds sooner, but he asked them if he could stay in school and finish 9th grade before he joined the team. And so they said, "Okay, sure, go ahead. Finish 9th grade, and then come join the team." So he had sort of other priorities on his mind.
The thing I read about him, it said, after his pitching performance, it didn't go well, and he went back, lived his life like any normal teenager. And I'm thinking, he probably didn't. He probably was pretty well known in his school as the guy who just pitched for the Cincinnati Reds, but...
Yeah, because he was from the area too. He's from just Hamilton, which is right outside of Cincinnati. Yeah, that's right. So everybody in the area knew who he was.
Yeah. Well, sadly, we lost him in 2007. But I wanted to ask you, as a Reds fan, do you have a favorite or signature moment. He was the voice of the Big Red Machine, him and Marty Brennaman.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, a huge moment, and it really in baseball history, that was such an important team. But do you have any memories of his
Well, I
voice?
remember memory of always hearing him in that he was. I said he was the voice of the Reds on radio, which means that when I would sneak the transistor radio into my room at night when they were on the West Coast and try to stay up late and listen to them play the Dodgers or the Padres, he was always the voice that I heard, and he was always the voice you heard in the car. And he did 1,000 commercials, Jeff. Oh my God, he did 1,000 commercials in the summer, from anything from lawn furniture to lawn fertilizer to lunch meat to grocery stores to you name it. He was doing a commercial for it. So you saw it. But really, what stood out to me was just how good of a player he was. Which all I ever knew him really was as a broadcaster, and you would see him if you went to the stadium early. He was throwing batting practice. Well into his 70s, you would see him throwing batting practice. But I went and looked, and I tried to find two players that he's most like, right? And you know what two players I came up with that he is most similar to in terms of his stats and, where he is in certain points of his career?
Who?
You know who those two were? Ron Darling and current player Kevin Gausman. So those are two pretty good players to have your career be very similar to. And that was a little surprising to me because they said I'd always heard he was a pretty good player, but I had never really seen him or dove into how good of a player he was. But a two-time All-Star, and I said Ron Darling and Kevin Gausman are very good comparisons of what he is for somebody that's trying to figure out what kind of pitcher he was.
He was actually a pretty good hitter too for a pitcher. He had a lifetime average of just under 200, which is pretty solid for a pitcher. He had 15 home runs, 78 RBIs. He had several seasons where he slugged in the 400s and 500s. Multiple 3 home run seasons. And it's obviously pitchers didn't hit that much. Now they don't hit at all, but even back then they didn't really hit all that much. But that's those are pretty solid numbers. It's enough of a sample size where you feel like he's a bit of a threat when he comes to the plate.
Yeah, the only thing that I always look back and I'm a little sad for him is all those years with the Reds, and the one year that he was there that they made it to the World Series was the year that he had gotten traded to Kansas City, and he wasn't on the World Series team, and then he was back the next year. So the 1 year out of his career that he wasn't in Cincinnati is the year they went to the World Series. So, but so many good memories of listening to him on the radio with Marty, and he did it. He started with Al Michaels. Al Michaels used to be the play-by-play guy for the Reds before Marty Brennaman, and so he had pretty good twosome that he worked with.
Do you remember his signature line when he would sign off?
I do. It'd say, "This is the old lefty rounding third and heading for home."
All right.
And so Marty Brennan would always, if they win, it'd be like, "And this one belongs to the Reds." And then after he would do the little wrap up before they went to the post game show. And, the old left-hander.
Right.
He's got a statue outside of Great American
right.
Ballpark, which people, that's a must go take your picture with.
All right. Well, we're going to round third, not go home. We're going to go to our next segment, and it's about Tracy Austin, tennis player. On June 11th in 1992, Tracy Austin became the youngest player ever inducted into the Tennis Hall of Fame at age 29. She had a fantastic career starting from a very young age, but it got derailed by injuries and a really tragic accident where she almost died. And it really sort of, all of those, toll on her body really just ended her career. But she's pretty remarkable she's so well known for how good she was at such a young age. I just want to throw a couple things out before I get some of your thoughts on this. So she won 2 Grand Slam singles titles, and she beat Chris Everett and Martina Navratilova. So pretty good as a teenager to beat those two players. Obviously, it was right before Navratilovan's prime, but still pretty good.
Yeah, and when she beat Chris Everett, she beat Martina Navratilova in the semifinal, and she beat Billie Jean King in the rounds.
Yeah.
So that's getting it done.
Right.
When you beat all three of them in a single Grand Slam, and then, like you said, she beat Martina Navratilova in 1981 when she won the second. But she had a penchant for beating very good players in very big spots. And when she was in Rome on clay, that's when she ended Chris Everett's 125 win match streak. Mm-hmm. And Chris Evert was really, really good on clay. To let you know how good Chris Evert was on clay, Chris Evert's career record is 382-22 on clay.
Wow.
That's 94.5 winning percentage for Chris Evert and a 125 match streak. And she ended it in 1979 when she was 16 years old.
Yeah, so I believe she's the youngest U.S. Open singles champ in tennis history at 16, and then she was the third youngest woman ever to reach a number one ranking, which she did on April 7th, 1980. And she also is the youngest to win a pro tournament, which she did at age 14. And I think the thing that's so remarkable about her, and this is kind of sticking with a little bit of our theme where we're talking about some of these young athletes, is her mental toughness was already so advanced for such a young age. And her skill set was already so developed. But the thing that I've always thought was really important for an athlete, probably more than the skill set, is the mental composure and mental makeup. Because you can get better, you can train, you can learn all, how to serve well and return a serve. And, obviously you have to have a gifted natural talent, that's for sure. But one thing that's really hard to train is having that mental capacity. And I think we were just talking about Joe Nuxall and how he had at a young age the ability to bounce back from that, what could have been someone giving up a baseball career, getting crushed at age 15. And then Tracy Austin, same thing, is just someone who was so mentally tough that she could bounce back from anything.
And what's important to remember about both of them is the time period in which they lived contributed a tremendous amount to that. Mm-hmm. Joe Nuxall, his picture probably wasn't even next to the box score around most of the country who read about it 2 days later, if they read about it at all. And Tracy Austin was not plastered on the internet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the way that she would be now. And she didn't have to have a TikTok channel, and she didn't have to have an X channel and a Blue Sky and all of these other distractions that she would have absolutely had back then, because advertisers would have fallen all over her in order to peddle everything from, soft drinks to cars to whatever. And here's, Tracy Austin, who went to Germany when she was 15, and she won a couple of she won 2 Porsches, Jeff, before she could even drive. And then she turns pro. She wins the U.S. Open on Saturday, and she goes to regular high school on Monday.
Yeah.
So that's not Coco Gauff.
Right.
Remember Coco Gauff coming up as a teenager, or even Eva Jovic now that came up when she was still in high school. And that is not their life at all. Coco Gauff, who actually the two of them play very similarly. They have very similar skill set. Their games match very well. If you're trying to think of like what kind of player was Tracy Austin, Coco Gauff is a really good comparison. She hits deep, really good at angles, quick, able to get to a lot of balls. Very Coco Gauff. But the amount of people that want and need Coco Gauff's attention outside of tennis, and the amount of people that are pulling her in 100 different directions. Yeah. That's something Tracy Austin could go to Wimbledon and walk down the streets of London with no bodyguard, and nobody would even know that she was there to play the tournament.
Yeah, that's such a great point because you're right. There's so many more distractions and so much more pulling at every athlete, but also you have so many more people trying to insulate an athlete as well these days and protect them
Hmm.
from all these other elements or take control of their life or act as some kind of barrier. And I think that also can sometimes have an adverse effect on an athlete because you don't get those natural connections, you don't get that sort of reality check on sort of your immediate world. You're sort of fed all this information and told you need to act this way or be this way, and you're not a young athlete. You're following that advice because that's what your caretakers are telling you.
And especially in a sport like tennis, where you've been in that bubble for a
Right.
long time, of you know the talent is developed and found out at 12, 13 years old, 14 years old, and at least at this time in women's tennis, your career was not very long. Your
Right.
window in order to be a pro tennis player was very short. A lot of times you were seeing at this time women in 25, 26, 27, and they were out. That it really took a generation till you got women playing into their 30s, and then to get to somebody like Serena and Venus to play to 40, or even like somebody like Ariane Sabalenka, who's probably going to play 35, 36, right? To be able to know that, hey, that's something that we can do. It was a very short, very compact window before you were expected to move on and do something else. And
Right.
it's not as if the money was an allure to stay, because you were hardly making anything,
Right.
even at the top of tennis. So uh, it was a very specific time period that she was able to thrive in. But I still think she probably had the game that if she had been a 90s tennis player or a 2000 tennis player and was afforded the equipment and the training that those players get, that even at 5'5", and let's think, she was 5'5", that's Leila Fernandez.
Right.
That's not even Coco. Coco's 5'9". Serena's 5'9". Sabalenka's 6 foot. So she's on the smaller side, that she would still be able to compete.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation about how good she could she have been if she didn't have the sciatica back injury and she didn't have
Mm-hmm.
the accident that I believe shattered her knee and created a lot of other challenges for her and internal injuries, things like that. Um, you know, what could she have been? She had such a complete game at such a young age, but she has admitted that some of her training needed to be improved, her physical training, and that's something she probably would have developed a little bit as she matured as an athlete. And then she has admitted a little bit of weakness in her serve, and you wonder if those things would get exploited. But on the other hand, we get into the player development, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing Coco's going through a little bit of that, where she's trying to reinvent her serve, and it's creating a lot of challenges for her. So it's nice to kind of think about and speculate on what Tracy Austin could have been.
And when you look at somebody like Iva Jovic, look at Iva Jovic last year
Yeah,
at 17, and look at her this year at 18, and now be like, where's Iva Jovic going to be at 21?
yeah,
And that's sort of the thing with Tracy Austin. He never really knew what that development was going to be. And certainly, if she were around and playing now, that development would be exponentially greater than it would have even been back then, just because of the amount of advances that there's been in not just how you physically train, but your nutrition, your rest, all of those things that were really non-existent in the late 70s and early 80s when it came to athletes.
yeah. Okay, let's jump ahead some decade or so to 2005 on June 12th. We did post about Annika Sorenstam, but really it was about Michelle Wie.
Mm-hmm.
And on June 12th, 2005, Michelle Wie lost by 3 strokes at the LPGA Championship. She was only 15 years old at the time. She turned pro later that year. And also later that year, she signed huge endorsement deals with Nike and Sony. She hadn't even turned 16 yet. And it was a lot for a young athlete, as we've been talking about some of the pressures and so forth on young athletes. So she really sort of fell under that sort of umbrella of, marketing and branding and so forth. And, maybe it stunted her ability to really reach her full potential she was an incredible golfer, but she had so many expectations, and it may have limited her success in the long run.
Yeah, when we were talking about Joe Nuxall and Tracy Austin and how they didn't have to deal with all of the nonsense you have to deal with now, Michelle Wie was one of the first ones that had to deal with all of it. There was no blueprint. It wasn't even like somebody like Simone Biles, who's come along now, who's talked about the pressures of social media and all of these things. She at least had a blueprint. She at least had 10 years of seeing other people go through it. Michelle Wie was the front lines of the new world, and how to navigate that was something that everyone was trying to figure out. They didn't even know what you were navigating at the time. That Joe Nuxall took a bad outing and it turned into motivation to come back, and Michelle Wie has a bad outing and the entire world dumps on her.
Right. Well, and one thing I really admire about Michelle Wie is she took it as an opportunity. She was really passionate about getting more girls interested in golf, and this was a time when there weren't that many girls interested in golf, and she wanted to get more interest there, and so she took sort of that criticism. She took a lot of that attention, and sort of use that as a way to motivate herself and get more interest in golf. And she was really known for going to the PGA and trying to compete with male players, something that was really unheard of, at least to the degree that she did that. She didn't make the cut, but she got pretty close on numerous occasions. And there's been few cases going back through the history of golf. Babe Dietrichson de Harrius is someone that I think of immediately of going into the PGA and competing with men, but she did it on a regular basis.
Yeah, she had done a lot of events, and like you said, not much success. But Annika Sorenstam, who's the other part of this equation, she had a handful of those events as well. Most notably, the 2003 Colonial, where she shot 5 over, and she did beat 11 guys that were on that. But I think the thing with Michelle Wie that makes it hard for the experience that she has is that, one, there was a huge expectation when it came to what was her return on investment from her investors, from her corporate sponsors. That was really a pushing for her thing. We don't really care about your development. We care that you get a ton of eyeballs at the sponsorship exemption that we're giving you. Like, right. They were just using her without really a thought about, well, wouldn't her being the greatest female golfer of all time in the long run be better for us? And ultimately, I don't think they cared. I think they cared that they got high ratings for their one weekend of the tournament that they were sponsoring. And two, when it goes to the players that you're playing with that are on the tour, when you've got a 10-year-old girl that qualifies for the U.S. Amateur Public Links, it's kind of a cute story. Like, oh, look at this 10-year-old from Hawaii, and it's cute, and God love you, and isn't that great, right? And then when you get a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old that hasn't won anything on the pro tour, that's showing up in a limo with a bunch of sponsorship exemptions, taking a spot in the field away from somebody that's out there grinding every week, and she's trying to compete against you for a check, doesn't make for a really happy locker room or a welcoming, cute story for this person coming in trying to take from me as a player. And so I think she ran into so many competing interests. We see this right now in the WNBA with Caitlin Clark. Look at how many people in the WNBA hate Caitlin Clark, even though she's really, really good for all of them. in the same way that Michelle Wie ultimately could have been really, really good for the LPGA, but there was no desire to make her a good LPGA player.
Right.
She should have been learning on the LPGA tour how to get out of the sand, how to save par when you need to, instead of having 100 cameras flashing at her when she's teeing off for 2 days and missing a cut in a men's event. She could have been learning her craft on the LPGA tour and becoming the greatest female golfer of all time. And I don't put any of that on Michelle Wie.
Right.
I don't put any of the blame saying, Michelle Wie, you screwed up your career. I think all the people around her, her parents, her coach, her agent, everybody that decided they were going to use Michelle Wie for themselves ruined what could have been one of the greatest players and one of the greatest stories of all time, because they stripped her of her love of the game and they stripped her of everything that made her great.
Yeah, you echoed a lot of what I was just thinking, is that the responsibility really falls on the parents, on the people, agents, and all the different corporate people around her who really can't really blame the corporate people so much, because you know what their motivations already are. It's really the people closest to her that bear that responsibility. And, as a parent, I know you can get excited and you want your child to get interested in the things you're interested in, and you push them to go in certain directions. Sometimes just letting your kid sort of chart their own path and seeing what they're interested in, free from your own sort of expectations. And I don't want to read into what her parents did or didn't do, because I don't know enough about that. But ultimately, the proof is in the pudding, right? What the end result is it probably shortened her career, and like you said, took away from the potential that she could have had with a much longer career. And missteps are made. I'm sure maybe her parents regret some of the choices that they made at that time, and it's unfortunate. And that's why I think mentorship for young athletes is so important, and finding someone who can help sort of cushion some of these expectations, especially in the current world that we're in, but also can help with that mental toughness, right? And we're seeing a new evolution in sort of athletes, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, where there's a new sort of approach or a new line of thinking for some of these athletes, especially those that are not on team sports, which really have to look out for themselves and their own brand and their own marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that actually brings us to Parker Valby, who is actually pretty recent history. On June 8th, we had posted about it, because back in 2024, so just a couple of years ago, Parker Valby broke her own NCAA outdoor 5,000 meter record in a time of 14:52 at Eugene, Oregon, and it was her 5th national championship of the season, and she became the first female distance runner ever to hold 5 national collegiate titles in the same academic year, in the areas of cross country, indoor 3,000, indoor 5,000, outdoor 5,000, and outdoor 10,000 meters. Amazing athlete to watch. And in fact, I think you and I were on the phone together when we were watching this race together, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, she was all the rage at the NCAA championships that year, because it was really about two things. How much was she going to break the record by, and would she get the Olympic standard so that she could qualify for Paris? And she got the record. She did not get the standard, but she did get the standard just after the Olympic trials, and was able to compete in the 10,000 meters at the Paris Olympics. But yeah, Parker Valby is another one of these athletes that we haven't seen somebody like her in a very long time. She's in a sort of fringe individual sport where there's a lot of people pulling her in a lot of different directions.
So she signed a deal with New Balance recently, October 2024, and she previously was with Nike. And after her NIL deal ended, she broke with Nike. She didn't re-up with them. She decided to move in a new direction with New Balance, and she cited some non-business decisions uh, for that reason. She felt that it had a more family environment, an encouraging environment. I mean, not surprisingly, Nike just seems like this faceless corporation that'll toss you aside in a second. So she felt that New Balance was a better place for her to be. And I thought the really interesting thing was, and it just shows the impact of the people that are around her. Her dad actually became an agent just so he could represent her and to have this DIY approach to signing her deal with New Balance and other endorsement deals. One, it helped them out because they didn't have to pay the 15% that you would normally pay to an agent. But two, he wanted to look out for his daughter and make sure she was well represented and had her interests taken care of, because clearly she has her own brand and her own marketing and her own mental health and her own everything in mind, and she wants to preserve that.
Yeah, and everyone thought that it was going to be a done deal with Nike because Nike had her NIL deal. They have agreements with the University of Florida, which she went to the University of Florida. They were their apparel company out there. But what New Balance is doing in terms of their team of runners that Nike is not doing is that New Balance is trying to find success through individuals and success through people, and the success through people is a reflection on their brand.
Right.
And Nike is trying to make everybody look like they're from Nike, and so that if you see Parker Valby running, you think Nike. As opposed to if you see Parker Valby running and winning, you think, wow, Parker Valby is amazing, and oh, that's a cute outfit and great shoes. Like,
right.
What's she wearing? Let's learn about Parker Valby. And that's the approach that they have taken with their middle distance and really made a focus on middle distance for New Balance, where Nike is a lot of sprinters and some field events and flash, and we want you to see what watch they're wearing and go buy that, or their boots, or all of these sort of fringe things. It's about selling products. And New Balance's has really been, their focus has been success. And they have a training program in Boston and a head coach that sort of runs their program. But Parker Valby is like, this doesn't necessarily work for me. I would like to work with my coach back in Florida that I went to college with. And they said, great, no problem. Check in with us. We'll work with that coach because that's what makes you comfortable. And that's what New Balance is about. And it's really worked for her because she had just come off she had a pretty bad foot injury. She had a broken bone in her foot, sidelined her for almost a year from competition. She just ran in May of this year her first 5,000 back, and she ran a personal best in LA, and she won the race. So she did great on her way back, and she's really targeting 2028. But for her, freedom and her health and her future was more important than a couple of extra bucks today, which she probably would have got with Nike. But if she can stay in the spotlight and stay healthy, she should be one of the stars of 2028, and it will all come back to her.
Yeah, and I think back what you said about Michelle Wie, how Nike just was interested in, we just want people to tune in for the weekend. We don't really care about developing you as an athlete. And she said that was important for her, and they wanted to, as you sort of alluded to with her coach, they want to help her get to be a better athlete because everyone wins when that happens. Their product wins, their brand wins, and she wins. And keeping Parker Valby in a good headspace and successful there's no losers in that.
There aren't. It's funny you talk about mentorship, and Ellie Perrier St. Pierre is really she's the pioneer woman of New Balance, who nobody kind of wanted her. She had some success, but not a lot. She didn't have a ton of funding. She was from a dairy farm in New England, and she hooked up with New Balance, and they really started this program around her and Emma Coburn and saying, hey, what can we do to try and compete with Ethiopia and Kenya and Djibouti? Because we're getting killed out there. And so they said, well, let's try some of what they're doing and some of what makes, American athletes, and let's see if we can compete with them. And Ellie Perrier St. Pierre and Emma Coburn both had success with the New Balance very early, and that was really what helped spur this program along. And Parker Valby's even said both of them have been of enormous help in helping her transition from what her life is like as a college track athlete to being a pro.
Yeah, and I want to bookend this whole episode with something we started saying about the 80s and the NBA basketball. And I'm going to make a connection here. We talked about that was emblematic of sort of what the 80s lifestyle was and what the 80s corporate climate was. And, I mentioned the famous line from Wall Street, greed is good, and Showtime Lakers and Flash and pizzazz. And I feel like we're entering an era now where, Parker Valby and the big story we got out of the Olympics with Alyssa Liu, how there was a big story about how she sort of pushed away all the people who were trying to take from her and trying to control her life, and she wanted to be her own individual. She wanted to control her own brand, and very similar, although different motivations, because Parker Valby's business oriented, and Alyssa Liu and Simone Biles would fall into this category as well. That was more about their mental health. But we're starting to enter an era where people are pushing back on corporations and trying to decouple themselves from corporations. And I look at how sports is so reflective of sort of what our societies are going through at different periods in time, whether it's the 80s, or then we got into the gritty 90s, and now in 2026 we're looking at athletes getting away from that corporate culture.
Yeah, I absolutely see the trend that we are going to see more Parker Valbys and more Michaela Schifrins and more Dorothea Veers and more Eileen Goos as we move forward, where people are realizing that they are the commodity. It's not Nike. Right? Nike needs to understand that they're a sewing machine in a warehouse, and their job is to fit your branding, right? They clothe your brand,
right?
Not you're a part of their brand. And once these athletes can push back and make these companies realize that, then maybe teams can. And Major League Baseball teams could say, hey, you know what, Nike? When you're making these uniforms, you need to make something that fits the Colorado Rockies brand. You don't need to make us look like we're Nike brand. That's what these guys are. They're a warehouse and a sewing machine. And the more athletes push back, the better. But people like Parker Valby, Simone Biles, Eileen Gu, Michaela Schifrin, Alyssa Liu, Amber Glenn, like they're the ones that are going to make the difference. And I hope they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that, we talked about all these different distractions and stress and people, external factors pulling athletes in so many different directions. But just like anything else, it's all a double-edged sword. Because without the social media and the ability to build your own brand free from sort of your corporate masters, to kind of break it down to a very simple term, you can do that now in the current, media climate we're in, and there is that ability to create that independence. So, it goes back to putting the right people around you who can help you sort of guide through that process and make sure you don't get sidetracked on the negative parts. We're all getting sucked into the negative parts of that social media 24-hour news cycle. The best that an athlete staying away from that as best as possible is, just benefits them.
It's important to remember that social media it's like a power saw. It's a really good tool, but it can hurt you and it can kill you.
Yeah. Well, wear your goggles and your gloves and you'll be okay, right?
Yes.
All right, Clayton, we're going to wrap it up there. I want to thank you as always. Such a fantastic conversation. For everyone out there, follow us on Substack, Facebook, YouTube at Sports and Leisure. Comment, post our content, share the history, share the knowledge, and comment on our posts, and we'll go ahead and respond to you during our show. All right, enjoy the week, Clayton. We'll talk to you next time.
All right, see you next time, Jeff.